Good news, everyone! Tonight, conversion therapy gets banned. Anti-trans protests bust. Trans art comes to Turf Island. The story of one trans man fighting back, and more. Good news starts right now. First up, Kentucky bans conversion therapy. From Aaron in the Morning. Last week, Governor Andy Beshear signed an executive order banning the use of conversion therapy in Kentucky. The order prohibits efforts to change an LGBTQ+ youth's gender identity or sexual orientation and will be enforced through licensure boards and public funding. Additionally, it directly refutes the anti-transgender claim that gender-affirming care itself constitutes conversion therapy. With this action, Kentucky becomes the 28th state to ban such practices. Beshear said, quote, "I have refused to wait when others won't do what is right. My faith teaches me that all children are children of God, and where practices are endangering and even harming those children, we must act. The practice of so-called conversion therapy hurts our children. It's something I've spoken out against time and again. It has no basis in medicine and has no basis in science." The executive order cites statements from the American Psychological Association and the American Counseling Association, which both call the practice unethical for licensed members to engage in. It also cites research by the Trevor Project, which states that 28% of LGBTQ+ youth who attempted suicide report being threatened with conversion therapy, and 28% report being subjected to such practices. The ban will be enforced through several different mechanisms, including the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, state agencies, state departments, and the professional certification and licensing boards operating in Kentucky. The executive order importantly rebukes a prominent anti-trans talking point, often used to push transphobia to left-leaning audiences: the claim that gender transition is itself a form of gay conversion therapy. This argument most notably featured in Pamela Paul's first major anti-trans article in the New York Times earlier this year, suggests that transgender individuals are just gay kids. This claim ignores the fact that gender identity and sexual orientation are distinct, that attitudes towards transgender people are significantly more negative than towards gay individuals. Therefore, transitioning actually makes that worse, and that most transgender people identify as lesbian, bisexual, gay, or queer after transitioning. Therefore, it doesn't actually make people less gay. Beshear's executive order blocks the use of such arguments to justify banning gender-affirming care, clarifying that conversion therapy bans do not include, quote, "any practice, treatment, or intervention that assists an individual seeking to undergo a gender transition or an individual who is in the process of undergoing a gender transition." Kentucky has been particularly harsh towards transgender and queer individuals. Many school districts have banned books about LGBTQ+ people and topics, citing Senate Bill 150, an anti-queer and anti-trans omnibus bill passed in 2023. The bill also prohibits gender-affirming care for transgender youth. It was notably rushed through a hearing after being deceptively announced with the microphone turned off during the House lunch hour. Although Governor Beshear vetoed that bill, it was ultimately forced into law through a party-line veto override. Beshear faced a $2 million campaign in anti-trans advertisements from the American Principles Project for vetoing that bill, yet still won re-election by a larger margin than his original victory. While the executive order marks a significant step in preventing conversion therapy in Kentucky, the state remains home to some of the most restrictive anti-LGBTQ+, particularly anti-trans, laws in the United States. These laws are currently being challenged in court, with a pending Supreme Court case from Tennessee expected to have a direct impact on Kentucky's gender-affirming care ban by the end of the year or early next year. Despite a GOP supermajority intent on targeting LGBTQ+ rights, Governor Beshear continues to demonstrate his commitment to protecting his citizens and pushing back against these attacks as much as his authority allows. It's also worth noting that in a previous report from Aaron in the Morning, it was revealed that 62% of Kentucky Republicans oppose attacks on LGBTQ and trans people. Next up, another anti-LGBT protest busts. Let's set the stage on this one with a clip from Rachel Gilmore.
And while organizers said they expected 2 million participants, reality fell pretty short of their expectations. Like, here's what this counter-protester told me about Montreal.
So much for the million march of people. It may be 24 people overall.
This is wild. I don't actually see any of the million protesters. I only see a bunch of counter-protesters. At this point, I decided to go for a walk and try to find the million marchers. I can't find any of the million protesters here, so I don't know where they went. I can't find them anywhere. And that goes for the demonstrations across the country, which I think sends a pretty clear message.
Canadian media outlets have been looking for these 2 million protesters in cities across the continent, but they seem to be shy or something, because from Toronto to Vancouver, in Ottawa, in Alberta, everywhere journalists looked, no group was larger than 50-ish. Though our northern neighbors are considerably less crazy than here in the US, last year's Transphobe Fest involved police action and arrests in several cities. Perhaps this nearly nil turnout across the continent is another sign in the ongoing trend we're seeing worldwide, where real people, regular people, just aren't falling for the conspiracy theories and the lies the fearmongers and hate groups try to spread anymore. We saw the protests fizzle in London. We saw the lack of antagonists at Pride this year. We noticed the missing at press conferences, failing to sign petitions for ballot measures, and only paid grifters like Chloe Cole showing up to speak against hundreds of pro-trans members of the public before legislative sessions. The transphobe movement is just failing. And we love to see it, but we can't relax and rest on our laurels, not while policymakers are still trying to wipe us from the face of the earth. But the good news is, the public, by and large, simply isn't falling for their nonsense anymore. Our next story, trans art comes to London, from Black Hills Pioneer. An artwork featuring the plaster face casts of hundreds of transgender people went on display last week in London's Trafalgar Square, where their features will be worn away by London's wind and rain over the next 18 months. Mexican artist Teresa Margolis's 1,000 Times in an Instant is a 3.3 metric ton cube covered in face masks of 726 trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people. The new sculpture evokes a zompantli, a rack used in Mesoamerican civilizations to display the skulls of captured enemies and sacrifice victims. It pays tribute to one of the artist's friends, a transgender woman named Carla who was killed in Mexico in 2015. The crime remains unsolved. The artist said, quote, "We pay this tribute to her and to all the other people who were killed for reasons of hate, but above all, to those who live on, to the new generations who will defend the power to freely choose to live with dignity." Organizers of the project say the work will naturally age while on display, with the detail of the faces slowly fading as the plaster remains exposed to the elements. So seeing an artwork there, in the heart of Turf Island, that is designed not only to recognize those who are lost, but those who are still to come, with the element of time incorporated into its design, is truly moving, and we love to see it. And now our top story. A South Carolina trans man fights back. From the Post and Courier. Sterling Misanin knew from a young age that he was a boy. His transition began in earnest after he moved to Charleston 3 years ago. But when a new South Carolina law halted a crucial step in his gender-affirming care, he decided to fight. Misanin, who is 32, is the lead plaintiff in a federal lawsuit against the state of South Carolina and the Medical University of South Carolina over a ban on transgender care that he and others allege discriminates against those seeking gender-affirming care. While 26 states have banned such care for minors, South Carolina is one of the most restrictive in the country because it also denies care to adults. The ACLU of South Carolina, representing Misanin and other plaintiffs, are seeking a preliminary injunction to keep what they contend is an unconstitutional law from continuing to deny them care. Cutting off gender-affirming care for minors was one of the first major pieces of legislation the South Carolina House of Representatives took up this year, holding a hearing on the bill on its first day of session. The bill barreled through committees and onto the floor for a full vote, despite the pleas and tears from dozens of families who showed up to testify about the devastating effect it would have on their children. It followed a similar process in the Senate, where one doctor after another testified that providing the care was supported by every mainstream medical group in the country, including the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics. Despite that, the bill passed and was signed into law by Governor Harry McMaster in May, where it was proclaimed to be one of the landmark child safety bills passed by the legislature this year. But there was little discussion about other provisions of the bill that prohibited public funds or Medicaid funds from being used to pay for gender-affirming care. Many were then surprised in June when MUSC Health decided that provision meant it had to end all transgender care. MUSC Health CEO Patrick Cawley said, quote, "The law prohibits the use of public funds directly or indirectly for gender transition procedures. MUSC Health funds are public funds. We are prohibited from providing gender transition services to all patients." MUSC will receive around $121 million in state funding this year, according to budget documents. That would be 12% of the university's budget, but about 2% of MUSC Health's projected $6 billion budget. The abrupt cutoff was a shock to most of MUSC's patients, who include some of its own employees, and it hit Sterling Misanin just days before he was scheduled to take the next step in his transition. Misanin knew he was a boy early on, and around age 5 adopted the name John, apparently in honor of a beloved lifeguard at the pool where his family went. His mother thought it was a crush, but Misanin said, quote, "It was more like I wanted to be him, which is a very different feeling." Running around the grocery store with his bowl cut, telling people his name was John and having them recognize him instantly as a boy was gratifying, he said. While that was allowed for a while, he said eventually he felt pressured by his family to give it up. But he persisted, preferring to hang out with boys and play tackle football and jump into pickup baseball games. It gave him a comfortable feeling that he didn't have around girls and typically feminine things that were expected of him, he said. Quote, "I truly felt like one of the guys, like I was a guy," he said. He was the one to go on hunting and fishing trips with his father and truly enjoyed those pursuits. They went backpacking on the Appalachian Trail, and his dad taught him to drink and smoke cigars. He would say with a wink that Misanin was his favorite son, even though there was another older brother who went to boarding school and apparently didn't share their interests. Only as he moved into adulthood did he begin to hear what transgender is and what it means. But it remained an abstract concept. There wasn't anyone on TV or anyone he had come across that could help him understand what it meant. It was only after college, when he met a couple of transgender women, that he could hear about the process of transitioning. He said, quote, "That really started to connect some of the dots in my mind about what might be possible." Then the pandemic hit. Outside of a few Zoom calls from family, he was alone, and Miss Annan was forced to look inward. Quote, "And that's when I really realized that lying to myself was exhausting. And honestly, what was the point of lying when it was just me by myself?" So, little by little, he began to accept himself and to move forward. His wardrobe didn't have to change much, and Miss Annan started therapy to help him work through how his life was evolving. Each of those steps was getting him more of a feeling of being himself than anything else he had experienced before. His position at work was being phased out, so he found a new job at a company based in Charleston. So he moved from Madison, Wisconsin. Another step. He said he used that opportunity to have a fresh start. He was hesitant about being himself in public, but was welcomed by friends and members of the LGBTQ community. And it gave him the courage to come out as a trans man, first to longtime friends, then to family, and finally at work as well. Because he deals with a lot of employees as a national manager involved in training, it was very public, but thankfully, they were very supportive, he said. With therapy and support, he felt comfortable starting a medical transition. He didn't want to wait months for the endocrinology appointment he had wanted at MUSC, where his other care was provided, so he began taking testosterone through another provider. It required going back to see the provider every 3 months for lab work, and then every 6 months, so he was continuously monitored as his body adapted. Observing how his body and voice were changing was euphoric, he said. To be able to start to see myself in a way that really aligned with how I've always seen myself in my head, and now people outwardly are going to be seeing the same thing. Next was top surgery, which reshapes the chest to create a more masculine appearance and alleviates the need for painful binding. Miss Annan said it was an immediate relief to not have to hide anything and to just be able to see himself as who he is. After that was to come the hysterectomy, which could be followed by further surgeries later on. It became an arduous process for Miss Annan of getting the pre-approval from his insurance company, letters from his mental health provider certifying his gender dysphoria was real, and arranging the schedule with the surgeons at MUSC. He plans his work schedule out a year in advance, so he had to arrange for his time off after the surgery and for others to take his place and adjust their schedules. There were a lot of things that had to be lined up precisely. The surgery was originally scheduled for March and had to be postponed because of a glitch with his insurance. It required redoing some things all over, and the new date became June 28th. Everything was on track in the weeks and days leading up to the surgery. He messaged back and forth with doctors' offices and completed the routine lab work. On June 24th, just 4 days before the surgery was scheduled, he was messaging with MUSC offices about labs and post-surgical instructions when his phone rang. It was a woman who didn't identify herself, but asked if he was Sterling Miss Annan. Then she asked if he had a surgery at MUSC scheduled. She said she was just letting you know that effective immediately, the surgery has been canceled, and that if he had questions, he should contact his providers. He immediately messaged his surgeon, who was able to call him within an hour to let him know that she had received an email from MUSC's leadership that gender-affirming care was suddenly no longer allowed. Left in disbelief, thinking it might be a cruel joke, he got his hopes up twice for the surgery, only to see them dashed. He was left dismayed and frustrated, but not one to just stew in frustration. Miss Annan began to think about what he could do about his situation. He filed an ethics complaint with MUSC, citing their policy of commitment to diversity and inclusion, but that ultimately went nowhere. He also reached out to the ACLU. A big part of the lawsuit is the way that Miss Annan and transgender patients and families have been discriminated against, said a spokesperson from the ACLU of South Carolina. Other patients can receive hysterectomies, but transgender men cannot. Other children can receive hormone therapy, even puberty blockers for those going through puberty prematurely, but transgender children that get the same treatment, even when that treatment is recommended and supported by the child's doctor, cannot. Some parents can make a decision for their children and some can't. And some doctors can follow the medical standards of care and some can't. Rather than doctors or parents, those decisions are being made by politicians. That is at the heart of the allegation of discrimination. This is a question of equal protection under the law. When we give something in this country, in the state of South Carolina, to one group of people and not to another, that is discrimination. Some of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit are transgender families and their children who are scrambling to find care, including by leaving the state. Others are adults whose care was also abruptly terminated. They appear under pseudonyms as transgender people face being fired from jobs, evicted from housing, or worse. Sterling Massanin has chosen to make his fight public. He said it was something he had to think about, but he also recognized that he is fortunate to be secure in his job, in his place, among his friends, and where he is in his life, in a way that others who are in the same fight might not be. He said, quote, "It was truly a decision of wanting to fight for myself, for sure, but then also for the people that I know that can't fight for themselves, at least not publicly, not in the way that he can and is." And to wrap things up on a high note, here's a bonus story that was cut from last week for time. Following up with two trans beauty queens. First, Bailey Ann, Miss Maryland, from the Baltimore Banner. Bailey Ann's mom was apprehensive when she told her that she was going to compete for the Miss Maryland USA pageant. Her mom thought her transgender daughter might be harassed and ridiculed, and worried for her safety. Quote, "I told her that the world is changing," recalled Bailey Ann, who doesn't use her last name because her identity has unfortunately also come with threats from people who don't agree with her existence. And so she competed this year and became the state's first trans woman title holder. She was also Maryland's first Asian American winner and the oldest contestant to represent the state in the Miss USA pageant. She said, quote, "I'm so glad I took that step. All the people who have reached out to me, I'm able to be an influence for them as well." Bailey Ann says she can't remember a time that she didn't feel like a woman. She said transitioning was wonderful, saying, quote, "My family knew. I always knew. And by high school, she was able to live her authentic self." Maybe it's that confidence and support that has prepared the barrier-breaking beauty queen, who not everyone has embraced. She said she has been the target of constant online attacks from trolls, as well as death threats to her family, and to her friends. Quote, "There have been times that I wanted to clap back so badly. People don't know me. If they would give me a chance, they would be in a better place, and we wouldn't have so many trolls or so many mean comments. We're all human and learning to learn and adapt. I can understand that." Bailey Ann calls becoming Miss Maryland a full circle moment in that it marked 20 years since she immigrated to the United States at age 11. Members of the Asian community in Silver Spring, where her family first settled, were some of her biggest supporters. She said, quote, "The Asian community, especially the Cambodian community, tends to stick together. That's part of her culture," she said. With 9 months left in her reign, she plans to use it to continue opening people's minds. That means being the Grand Marshal of a parade in Cottage City, a small town in Prince George's County, reaching out to fashion designers this month for modeling and collaboration opportunities during New York Fashion Week, and even lending her voice to talk about youth mental illness at the Baltimore Banner's annual Impact Maryland Big Ideas event next month. She knows that increasing her visibility in society will help make visibility and existence easier for the next generation, whether that be LGBTQIA+ people, women of color, or even of housewives. There has been a lot of pushback and negativity in the media. Although I'm very strong-minded, I am still human. I am not doing this for just myself, she said. Here are some other interesting facts Bailey Ann shared about herself. First of all, she admires Marsha P. Johnson, the late trans woman and LGBTQ rights activist, whom she calls a shero. Quote, "A lack of acceptance should not prevent a person from being themselves. It's important to recognize the past, present, and future. I'm thanking the past because without the past, I couldn't be here. I am taking up space in the most positive way," she said. On that note, she wants to be an inspiration to other housewives. She does not want the role of a wife to be reduced to simply supporting the spouse. She wants wives to pursue their own hopes and dreams, regardless of age, which is why she ran for Miss Maryland in her 30s. She also wants to emulate the same strength and grace that Michelle Obama did as First Lady, and in her life in general. Saying, quote, "I hope my win can encourage other women to never give up on themselves. Go out there, finish school. Go out there, find your next calling. You don't have to give up on your dream. Pursue any dream you have." Trans is beautiful and international. Our other beauty queen this evening is Miss Singapore finalist Patricia Zayarya, telling the story of her wedding from 8 days. "I was shocked when I received the email that I would be in the top 15. As a trans woman, it shows that Singapore is slowly becoming more open," Patricia said. The 33-year-old fashion advisor told interviewers that after the Miss Universe Singapore pageant scrapped the age limit and allowed married and divorced women to apply, she knew it was a sign that her chance had arrived. Last year, Patricia was the first runner-up at Miss International Queen 2023, a pageant for transgender women, so she knew she stood a pretty good chance in the general competition. She said, quote, "I felt it was time for me to tap into my full potential and contribute towards my community. Quote, I possess a quality to be up on that stage and serve as a great representation for women of all backgrounds." Being an efficient planner, she even uses her interview opportunities as practice sessions, rehearsals if you will, a practice run for the upcoming finals of the Miss Universe Singapore competition. She said, quote, "I plan to inject my own message, if accepted, and to relay to society what it takes for me to get here and to help others like me gain more acceptance from the public." Of course, with the Miss Universe Singapore being the most well-known pageant in Singapore, Patricia says that it takes another level of confidence and courage. She says, "I'm competing with cis women who have years more practice and experience than I do, and I'm up against a lot of discrimination as well as hate." She said her method to deal with hate is to simply rise above it and be one with an open heart and positive mindset. She said her biggest supporter has to be her mother, who is a housewife. She says that her mom never fails to say in their native tongue, "My daughter is beautiful." Of course, Patricia brightens up the most when talking about her husband, who, like her, is also Muslim. He works as a testing inspector. They've been married for 7 years, and the pair first met when they were serving in the national service. Patricia had just downgraded from being a rifleman while her husband was a storeman. She said that he asked her out by asking if she would like to change her Facebook status from single to in a relationship. As we all know, Facebook official is the most official. She did say it was hard because his family was very against it. They knew that the couple were dating before her transition when she still presented as male. Her husband remained very firm about wanting to be with her though, and wouldn't allow anyone to suggest that they break up. So they decided to move in together and rented a small room. After SRS, they were able to get married and apply for a BTO to have a place of their own. Patricia says that her husband has always said that he loves her for the person she is and not for her gender. Their wedding, when the time was right, she wanted it to be as traditional and normal as possible. It was for him to feel like it was no different from marrying any other woman. Only her family and friends turned up, however, as her husband didn't want his side to interfere because of their attitudes. Even so, over 300 people showed up. 300 people who love and support a couple is quite the party, one dare say. Her husband continues to support Patricia through her pageants, although he doesn't really understand the nature of the competitions. Patricia says her biggest inspiration was Angela Maria Ponce Camacho, who was Miss Universe Spain in 2018. She paved the way for many of us by being the first trans woman to represent her home country. Her stories of struggle and her relationship with her partner have been a significant source of inspiration and motivation for Patricia to reach where she is today. And she hopes that she, in turn, can serve as inspiration for more trans women, for more trans people, for more women of all backgrounds in days still to come. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe. Support our work by becoming a patron at patreon.com/thetranspositions and reap heaps of benefits. Our meme of the week was posted by Bumblebee. And if you want to put an end to holding educational opportunities out like a carrot at the end of a gender-based Hunger Games gladiatorial combat style stick, join us on Discord. Also, if you have good news concerning trans people you'd like to see reported on, you can tell us about that in the Discord as well. For the Transpositions, I've been Ember Belrad.